I still remember the sound of that announcement echoing through the terminal, Flight 217 arriving from Atlanta. I was early, clutching Daniel's favorite Navy scarf, the one I always brought when I picked him up from his business trips. It was supposed to be a simple evening. We'd grab dinner, laugh about the little things, maybe argue gently about who'd forgotten to feed the cat. But that night, the universe had other plans. Because when the crowd began pouring through the gate, my heart stopped. There he was, my husband, Daniel, were smiling. But he wasn't alone. His hand was wrapped around another woman's, and that woman was my sister. The sister I buried 8 years ago. My mouth went dry. The world tilted. I blinked hard, thinking maybe grief was playing tricks on me again. Those cruel flashes of memory that come when you least expect them. But no, she looked up, and our eyes met. I knew that face. The same honey-brown skin, the faint birthmark just beneath her jaw, the dimple that deepened when she smiled. She smiled at me then, not shy, not afraid, but calm, like she'd been waiting for this. Daniel's expression, though, told a different story. His smile froze midair, and his eyes, those steady, confident eyes I had trusted for 25 years, filled with terror. He let go of her hand as if burned, whispering something I couldn't hear. My fingers trembled around the scarf. My throat tightened, but no words came out. Every step she took toward me felt like thunder rolling through my chest. My heart screamed, "It's impossible!" Because I had stood over her coffin. I had chosen her dress. I had placed lilies, her favorite, on her grave. How could she be standing here, alive, holding the hand of my husband? I heard Daniel say my name, Margaret, but it sounded far away, like it was echoing from underwater. I took one step forward and the scent hit me. That familiar mix of gardenia and vanilla she always wore. It wasn't just someone who looked like her. It was her. My knees weakened. I remember gripping the railing just to stay upright. "Daniel," I whispered, "who is that?" He stammered, his words tumbling out in fragments. She just looks like, she's not, Margaret, please." But she interrupted him with a voice that sliced through every lie I'd ever believed. "You always were dramatic, big sister." Her tone was soft, almost teasing. My vision blurred. I could barely breathe. "Lillian?" I said, and my own voice didn't sound like mine anymore. The woman smiled wider. "Didn't expect to see me again, did you?" People around us had started to notice. A few heads turned. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, that lady's crying." Because I hadn't realized it until then. Hot, stinging tears rolled down my face. Daniel grabbed my arm, trying to lead me away, but I pulled back. "Tell me what's going on," I demanded, my voice breaking. "Tell me right now." He shook his head, whispering, "Not here, Margaret, please, not here." But I couldn't stop. The air in the terminal felt heavy, pressing against my chest. Then she said it, the sentence that shattered every piece of my reality. "I didn't die, Margaret. You just never wanted to find out the truth." It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. My vision went white, and I remember the sound of Daniel's voice calling my name, the scent of perfume, the chaos of footsteps rushing toward me. Then nothing. Just darkness. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was a sterile white ceiling and the sound of a heart monitor beeping beside me. A nurse's voice drifted through the fog, gentle and rehearsed. "Mrs. Miller? You fainted at the airport." My lips felt dry as I whispered, "Where's my husband?" She hesitated, just long enough to tell me she knew something I didn't. "He's outside, ma'am." "With the other woman?" For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. Maybe my grief had finally broken me. But the nurse's tone, her choice of words, confirmed it wasn't a dream. The woman who was supposed to be dead, my sister, my Lillian, was alive, sitting in the waiting room with my husband. When Daniel finally came in, I didn't let him speak. "Is she alive?" I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then nodded once. My heart twisted. "How long?" I whispered. He avoided my gaze. "It's complicated," he muttered. "She'll explain everything when you're better." I could taste blood from biting my lip too hard. "No," I said slowly. "You'll explain it now." He sighed and rubbed his temples, that old performance he did whenever he wanted to look helpless. "Margaret, you've been through a shock. You need to rest." I laughed then, a dry, bitter sound that didn't even sound human. "Don't tell me to rest, Daniel. Tell me why my dead sister was holding your hand." He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor. That silence was worse than any lie he could have told. I realized in that moment that the man I thought I knew, the one I trusted with my whole life, was gone. Or maybe he'd never really existed. Later that night, as I lay in the hospital bed pretending to sleep, I heard them talking in the hallway. Her voice was unmistakable, smooth, confident, alive. "She knows," Lillian said quietly. Daniel hissed back, "You shouldn't have come. Not like that. Not there." "Oh, please," she replied. "It was bound to happen eventually." Bound to happen eventually. Those words burned into my skull. I kept my eyes closed, breathing slow, praying they wouldn't come in. Every syllable they spoke dripped with guilt and something darker, familiarity. That easy rhythm between them. My sister and my husband, together, talking like co-conspirators. The next morning, when I was discharged, Daniel offered to drive me home. I refused. The moment we stepped outside, the sunlight felt wrong. Too bright for the kind of darkness I felt inside. I watched him walk away toward the parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, whispering again. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't just betrayed. I was surrounded by ghosts who were very much alive. That night, alone in my living room, I opened the old photo album. Every picture of Lillian and me as children felt like a lie now. I traced my finger over her smiling face and asked out loud, "Why, Lillian? Why come back now?" The silence in the room seemed to answer me, a silence that felt almost alive. I replayed her words over and over. "You just never wanted to find out the truth." What truth? What did I refuse to see? What secret had I buried with her? I didn't know it then, but that moment, that encounter at the airport, wasn't just a coincidence. It was the beginning of something much darker, something planned. Because if Lillian was alive, then who exactly had I buried in her grave? They say that before your world collapses, life gets quiet, peaceful, almost too perfect. And that's exactly how it was for me. Before that day at the airport, before the whispers, before the truth tore my family apart, I believed I was happy. My husband Daniel and I had built a life that people envied. Every Sunday we sat in the front pew of the church, holding hands like we were still newlyweds. Our accounting firm was thriving. Our sons, Matthew and Christopher, were off at college doing well, calling me every few days just to check in. I was proud, content, secure. Or at least I thought I was. Daniel had always been the kind of man people trusted instantly. He was charming without trying, the kind of person who remembered everyone's name and made them feel seen. When clients came in, he'd greet them with that warm smile, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Couldn't do this without my Margaret," he'd say, and I'd blush every time, even after 25 years of marriage. But now, looking back, I realized something I couldn't see then. Charm is often a mask, not a gift. At night, when we closed the office and drove home, he'd hum softly to old jazz records, tapping the steering wheel with a rhythm that made me feel safe. We'd pass the church where we'd been married, the grocery store where we'd bought our first week's groceries as newlyweds, the small park where he proposed. He'd always squeeze my hand then, as if to remind me of everything we'd survived together. It felt solid, the kind of love that could weather anything. But what if what you're standing on isn't love at all? What if it's a stage, and you're just the only one who doesn't know it's a performance? Lillian was the only storm in my otherwise peaceful life. My younger sister, my opposite in every way. Where I was careful, she was reckless. Where I followed rules, she danced over them barefoot and laughing. She'd always been wild, beautiful, fragile in that dangerous way that drew people in. I loved her fiercely, even when she broke things, hearts, promises, boundaries. Especially when she broke them. But 8 years ago, she was taken from me in the cruelest way imaginable. The police said it was an accident, a fiery car crash on a lonely road just outside of town. They found her bracelet, the one I'd given her for her 25th birthday, twisted and blackened in the wreckage. The coroner said the dental records matched. I remember falling to my knees when they told me. For days, I couldn't eat or sleep. I just sat in her old room, holding that burned bracelet in my hand, smelling the faintest trace of her perfume still clinging to it. I kept thinking she was supposed to come over that night. She was supposed to tell me something. The funeral was quick. Too quick. Daniel said it was better that way. He said keeping her body out too long would just make it harder for me. "She wouldn't want a spectacle, Margaret," he told me gently, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "She'd want peace." I remember nodding through tears, trusting him completely. He handled everything, the paperwork, the insurance claim, even the coffin. I just stood there, numb, watching as they lowered her into the ground. But now, when I replay that day in my mind, certain things don't add up. The closed casket. The sudden cremation he insisted on. The way he avoided my eyes when I asked to see her one last time. I thought it was grief. I thought maybe he was trying to protect me. But now I wonder, was he protecting someone else? For years I buried those doubts. I poured myself into work, into church, into being the perfect wife and mother. Daniel said that was my gift, keeping things together. And I believed him. Until the cracks began to show, it started small. Receipts for places he claimed he'd never been. Late nights at the office that didn't match the schedule on our calendar. Once I found a lipstick mark on his shirt collar, a deep wine red I'd never wear. When I asked, he laughed and said it must have been from a client's hug. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. Because the alternative, that the man I'd built my life with was lying, was too painful to face. Then one morning, while putting away laundry, I found something that changed everything. A letter, tucked deep inside his dresser, sealed but unaddressed. My heart pounded as I turned it over. The handwriting was unmistakably his. Inside, written in that clean, careful script I'd watched him use 1,000 times, were just 9 words. Our plan worked. She'll never know. D. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I read it again. And again. Who was what plan? And who was she? I remember sitting there on the bedroom floor, the morning sunlight spilling across the carpet, staring at those words until they blurred. My stomach churned. My hands shook so hard I almost tore the paper. Something deep inside me, something quiet and instinctive, whispered, "You've been living in someone else's story." But it was the envelope that truly made my blood run cold. Because on the back, written faintly in pencil, was a single initial. L. I froze. 8 years. 8 years since her death, and here was her initial in my husband's drawer. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, that maybe it stood for something else, a client, a supplier, anyone but her. But deep down I knew. I knew that no matter how much I'd tried to bury her memory, Lillian was still here, haunting the edges of my life. That night, I confronted Daniel. I held up the letter trembling and asked, "Who is this for?" He didn't even look surprised, just annoyed, like I'd interrupted something important. "Margaret," he sighed, "why do you always have to dig?" "It's nothing. Just an old inside joke." I stared at him. "An inside joke with who?" He hesitated, just for a second, but long enough. "No one you know," he said quickly, reaching for the paper. I pulled it back. "Then why is there an L on the back?" His jaw tightened. "You're imagining things," he said, his tone darkening. "You need to stop letting your grief make you paranoid." That word, paranoid, hit me like a slap. It wasn't the first time he'd said it either. Whenever I questioned him, that was his weapon. And I'd always backed down, but this time something in me refused to be silenced. I took the letter and locked it in my desk drawer. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it was the first thread of something much bigger. And I wasn't letting go until I unraveled it. Over the next few days, I began watching Daniel closely. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. The way his phone never left his pocket. The hushed calls late at night that stopped when I walked into the room. I tried to ignore it, to focus on work, but every glance, every lie felt heavier than the last. And then, something happened that shattered the fragile piece I'd been clinging to. A week later, while Daniel was at work, I decided to look deeper. I opened his office drawers one by one until I found it, a second envelope. This one wasn't sealed. Inside was a small scrap of paper with a phone number scrawled in his handwriting. No name, no explanation. Just 10 digits, and beneath it, 2 words. Call her. I don't know what came over me. My hands moved before my mind could stop them. I picked up the phone, heart hammering in my chest. I hesitated for a moment, staring at those numbers, telling myself I was being crazy. But then I dialed. The line rang once, twice, and then a voice answered. Soft, familiar, impossible. "Hello?" She said. I couldn't breathe. My throat closed. That voice, that gentle, lilting tone that used to sing me lullabies when we were little, I knew it better than my own heartbeat. My vision swam. I whispered, barely audible, "Lillian?" There was a pause on the line, a sharp intake of breath. And then calmly, as if she'd been expecting me, the woman said, "You shouldn't have called this number, Margaret." Before I could speak, the line went dead. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, shaking so hard I could barely think. My heart pounded so violently it hurt. Every logical explanation crumbled. Either I was losing my mind, or my sister, the woman I had buried with my own hands, was somehow alive. I looked at the letter again, the one with Daniel's handwriting and that cold, mocking sentence. Our plan worked. She'll never know, but I knew now. I just didn't understand how. Not yet. And as I sat there, alone in that office, surrounded by the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of the clock, one thought echoed louder than all the rest, a thought that made my blood run cold. If Lillian was alive, what else had Daniel been lying about? Because something told me that phone call was only the beginning. And when I called that number again the next morning, desperate for answers, the voice that answered wasn't just familiar. It was Lillian's. When I called that number, I wasn't expecting anyone to answer. But when she did, my blood froze. The voice on the other end was low, deliberate, and achingly familiar. "Margaret," she said. My name from her mouth. 8 years of grief collapsed into that one word. I could barely whisper back, "Lillian?" There was a pause, then she said softly, "I can't talk yet." The line went dead. No explanation. No goodbye. Just silence. But that silence was louder than any scream. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying her voice in my mind. The exact cadence, the way she always stretched the R in my name. I'd heard it 1,000 times growing up, usually before she talked me into some trouble. I wanted to believe it was a cruel prank, maybe a recording, maybe my mind slipping under stress. But my gut knew. That was my sister. Alive. And suddenly, every comforting lie I'd built my life on began to crack. The next morning, I tore through every corner of the house. Old albums, files, drawers. I found a photo frame that had hung in our hallway for years, a family picture from our 10th anniversary. Behind it, taped to the back of the frame, were more photographs. Candid shots. Daniel and Lillian, together. At a resort. By a lake I'd never been to. And the worst part? The dates on the prints? 2 years after her funeral, my breath caught in my chest. The woman smiling beside my husband looked alive, healthy, happy. There was even one of her wearing the same gold bracelet that had supposedly identified her body. What kind of monster stages a death that perfectly? And what kind of man keeps the evidence hanging behind his own wedding photo? When Daniel came home that evening, I tried to act normal. Dinner on the table, candle lit, the usual quiet domestic peace. But inside I was trembling. I asked him about his trip, the one he'd just returned from, and he smiled that calm, pastor-perfect smile. "It was fine," he said. "The conference went well." Then he reached for my hand, kissed it, and said, "You look tired, sweetheart." Don't worry so much. That sentence. Don't worry so much. The same one he used when we buried my sister. When I asked if we should request a second autopsy, he'd said, "Don't worry so much." When I hesitated to sign the insurance papers, "Don't worry so much." It hit me then that maybe my husband didn't soothe me to calm my fears. Maybe he said it to control them. I waited until he fell asleep before sneaking his phone from the nightstand. My fingers shook as I scrolled through his messages, but most were deleted, clean, careful. Except for one, a single text buried deep in his archived chats. From a contact labeled L, it read, "Our plan worked." She'll never know. My heart nearly stopped. I wanted to scream, to wake him, to claw the truth out of him. But instead, I locked myself in the bathroom, staring at that message until dawn. The woman I buried, the one whose ashes I spread by the ocean, had been conspiring with my husband. And whatever that plan was, I was the fool who lived inside it. For the next few days, I became someone else entirely, paranoid, quiet, observing every word, every glance. Daniel started noticing. He'd come up behind me when I was cleaning, his breath warm on my neck. "You're distant lately," he'd say softly. "You're not yourself." And I'd smile back and say, "Maybe I'm just tired." But inside, I was taking notes. Every lie, every inconsistency. Then one afternoon, while Daniel was at work, I opened our home safe. I'd never bothered before. He handled our accounts, but I remembered the code, our anniversary date. Inside, beneath stacks of boring tax papers, was a black folder marked simply personal. My stomach dropped when I opened it. There were bank statements from an offshore account. 2 names on it, Daniel Reynolds and L. Grace. Lillian's middle name was Grace. The transaction showed deposits matching every trip he took, each labeled with vague notes: consulting, transfer, conf. I followed the trail, line after line, until I reached the last entry. Dated 3 weeks ago, $75,000, Belize withdrawal. That's when I realized he hadn't just lied to me. He'd built an entirely separate life, one that thrived on the ashes of mine. But the final page in that folder was what made me sink to the floor. It wasn't a bank record. It was a death certificate. My sister's name. The same one we'd used years ago. Identical, except this copy was marked void. My head was spinning. I flipped the page and froze. Behind it was another document. Another death certificate. But this one had my name. Margaret Reynolds. Date of death, November 18th. That was 3 weeks from today. I don't remember breathing for several seconds. My own name. My birth date. My cause of death. Vehicular accident. Just like Lillian's. I dropped the papers, shaking uncontrollably. Every light in the house suddenly felt too bright. Every sound too loud. I ran to the window, half expecting to see someone watching me. I checked the locks twice, 3 times. I even unplugged the phone. The world I thought I knew had turned into a stage set. Fake walls, fake people, fake love. When Daniel came home that evening, I couldn't look him in the eye. He kissed my forehead, told me he was going to take a shower, and left his phone on the counter. My instincts kicked in again. I checked the screen. There it was. A new message. From L. She knows. I dropped the phone as if it burned me. He came out moments later, towel around his waist, casual, humming a hymn. I forced a smile, but my hands were trembling. He looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly. "Is something wrong, honey?" he asked. My voice barely worked. "Just a headache," I said. He nodded slowly, like he didn't believe me. That night, I slept with the lights on. The days that followed were like living inside a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I started noticing small things. A strange car parked across the street. The feeling of footsteps behind me in the grocery store. The way Daniel's tone changed when I mentioned my sister. Once, when I accidentally dropped a plate, he flinched so violently it startled me. He was nervous. Maybe as nervous as I was. I began documenting everything. Printing emails. Photographing files. Keeping backups on a flash drive hidden inside my hairdryer. I wasn't crazy. I couldn't afford to be. I started calling the number from that mysterious letter again, but it never connected. Until one night it did. A woman answered, whispering like she was in hiding. "Margaret," she said again. This time I could hear fear in her voice. "Listen to me. You need to leave the house." My throat went dry. "Who are you?" I demanded. There was rustling on the other end, then the sound of distant waves. "It's me," she said. "It's Lillian. But you have to understand, Daniel isn't who you think he is." Before I could ask anything else, the line went dead again. I called back. Over and over, no answer. That night, I sat in the dark of my living room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and wondering how much of my life had been staged. The funeral. The insurance. Even the way he held me when I cried. Was it all part of their plan? I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up suddenly to a noise outside. Metallic, rhythmic. I went to the window, heart pounding, and there he was. Daniel, in the backyard, digging. The moonlight glinted off the spade as he pushed it into the dirt again and again. And beside him was a suitcase. It was large, heavy-looking. And every few minutes he'd stop digging, wipe his forehead, and glance back at the house. At me. I ducked away from the window, heart racing, hand over my mouth to keep from gasping out loud. My mind was spinning. The photos, the letters, the fake certificates. Now this. And that's when the truth hit me like ice water down my spine. He wasn't planning to leave me. He was planning to bury me. But the worst part? That suitcase. It wasn't empty. Because when Daniel stopped digging and unzipped it, I saw something pale, something that looked like a hand, fall out into the dirt. And that's when I realized my story wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. Because nothing prepared me for the night I found my husband digging behind our house, with a suitcase big enough for a body. That night, when I saw Daniel out there in the mud, digging like a man possessed, something inside me broke, and then hardened. I stood at the window trembling, watching him lower that suitcase into the earth. The sound of the shovel slicing through wet soil still echoes in my mind. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "It's done." Then he covered it slowly, deliberately, like he was burying more than just a secret. When he came back inside, I pretended to be asleep. I heard his footsteps pause at the bedroom door, felt his eyes on me in the dark. My heart beat so loud I was sure he could hear it. He lingered for a moment, then crawled into bed, his arm heavy around me like a chain. I counted every breath until the sun came up. At dawn, when he left for work, I slipped out the back door barefoot. The ground was still wet. The air smelled like iron and rain. I found the spot easily. Fresh dirt never lies. My fingers shook as I dug, the soil cold and slick beneath my nails. I half expected to find bones, but what I unearthed was almost worse. Inside that mud-streaked suitcase were pieces of the life I thought I knew. Old photos of Daniel and Lillian, both smiling like newlyweds. Fake passports, both bearing their faces under different names. And at the bottom, bloodied clothes. A blouse I recognized. My sister's. I dropped to my knees. My breath came out in gasps, the kind that burn your lungs. This wasn't just betrayal, and it was choreography. They'd planned every step, every lie, every business trip and church retreat. My grief had been their cover story. I went to the police that morning, still covered in mud, clutching the suitcase like a lifeline. The officer at the desk looked at me like I was hysterical. I told him everything, about the photos, the fake documents, the phone calls, the grave. He listened, nodding politely, and then said the words that nearly sent me over the edge. "Ma'am, maybe this is just grief resurfacing. You've suffered a loss before. Are you seeing a therapist?" I wanted to scream, to shake him until he saw the truth spilling out of my eyes. Instead, I left, alone. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring at the suitcase. If no one was going to believe me, I'd make them. I started documenting everything, timestamps, photos, voice memos, even conversations. Every time Daniel called someone, I made note. Every trip, every late-night text, every slip in his story. I didn't eat much. I didn't sleep. My whole life became an investigation. Then I remembered something my cousin Clara once told me. She's a lawyer, sharp as glass and twice as dangerous. She always said, "If you want justice, bring proof they can't deny." I called her, voice trembling, and told her everything. There was silence on the other end, then a long exhale. "Maggie," she said quietly, "you need to come over. And bring everything." When I arrived, she spread the contents of the suitcase across her dining table. Her eyes darkened as she examined the documents. "These aren't just fake IDs," she murmured. "These are tied to accounts, offshore." She typed something into her laptop, cross-referencing the serial numbers on the passports. I watched her face go pale. "These aren't just aliases," she said. "They're registered under your name." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, my name?" She turned the screen toward me. There it was. Transaction after transaction, all pointing back to me. Money laundering, insurance payouts, transfers from the very account I thought we shared. They had built their crime on my identity. If they ever got caught, I'd take the fall. The grieving widow turned criminal. And Daniel? He'd already buried the evidence. Literally. Clara and I spent days collecting more proof. We traced emails, pulled public records, even hacked into the old company account we once shared. Every line led back to them. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Lillian's death had been faked, the insurance cashed out, and the funds funneled overseas through accounts tied to me. But there was something else too, something darker. Hidden within one of the documents was a draft of a new will. My signature forged at the bottom. It left everything, the business, the house, the life I'd built, to Daniel. Dated 2 weeks before my supposed accident. That's when I stopped feeling afraid. Fear turned into something else, something sharp. If they wanted me gone, I'd make sure they were the ones to disappear. Clara filed the case quietly, bypassing Daniel's connections. We built it brick by brick, the fake passports, the offshore trail, the staged death. The authorities were slow to believe, but the evidence was undeniable. When the summons finally came for Daniel to appear in court, I felt my hands steady for the first time in months. The night before the hearing, Daniel tried to play the role of the perfect husband one last time. He made dinner, poured wine, even put on our wedding song. I sat across from him, smiling through every toast, watching the flicker of candlelight dance in his eyes. He said, "You know, Maggie, sometimes I think you forget how good we are together." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. "You're right," I said softly. "I almost forgot what you were capable of." The next morning, the courthouse was colder than I expected. My hands trembled as I clutched the folder of evidence. I didn't know who would show up until I heard a voice behind me. Familiar, smooth, alive. Margaret. I turned, and there she was, Lillian, my baby sister, standing there like a ghost made flesh. Her hair was shorter, her skin paler, but it was her. She smiled, that same crooked, knowing smile, and slid her hand into Daniel's. They walked in together, confident, united, like a couple. For a moment, everything inside me went silent. The room blurred. I could hear the sound of my own pulse, heavy and deafening. But when I stood, my voice didn't shake. I looked straight at Daniel and said, "Tell them, Daniel, who's buried in my sister's grave?" Lillian's smirk faltered. Daniel looked like he'd been slapped. The judge banged the gavel, demanding order, but I didn't stop. I opened the folder, sliding the photographs, the bank records, and the forged documents across the table. "You staged a death," I said. "You stole from your own family, and you tried to make me your scapegoat. But you made one mistake. You underestimated the woman you tried to bury." The room erupted. Reporters scribbled, lawyers whispered, and Daniel's face drained of color. But I wasn't done. I pulled out one final envelope, slid it across the bench to the judge. Inside was something Clara had found the night before. A recording. A secret one. On it, Daniel's voice. "We can't risk her finding out," he said. "Once the papers are signed, the accident will take care of everything." And then Lillian's voice, clear as day, answering, "She'll never see it coming." The judge's expression hardened. Daniel tried to lunge forward, shouting, "That's taken out of context." But his lawyer yanked him back. Lillian froze, eyes darting toward the door like she was already planning her escape. And me? I just sat there, calm, watching them crumble under the weight of their own lies. But just as I thought it was over, something shifted. The clerk approached the bench and whispered something to the judge. Papers were exchanged. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw Daniel's lawyer go pale. The judge cleared his throat and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, "we've just received additional evidence pertaining to your case." Daniel turned toward me, confusion flickering into fear. Lillian's hand slipped from his. The judge continued, "We'll adjourn briefly to review it." I felt my pulse thundering as they gathered the documents, because I knew what was in that folder. I'd submitted it myself, quietly, the night before. It wasn't about Lillian. It wasn't even about the insurance or the passports. It was something worse. It was proof of the crime Daniel committed long before Lillian's faked death. The one that made all of this possible. The one that showed he didn't just steal money. He stole a life. And when the judge called my name, Daniel's face turned white. Because the evidence I brought wasn't about Lillian. It was about him. He stood there under the fluorescent lights, pale and shaking, while I sat only a few feet away, close enough to smell the cologne I once associated with safety. Now it made my stomach turn. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom, steady and cold. "Present the DNA report." My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear the clerk's words. Every sound, the rustle of paper, the scrape of a chair, felt stretched, warped by years of betrayal compacted into this single, unbearable moment. And then, like a blade sliding through glass, the truth cut the air open. The remains buried in Lillian's grave weren't hers. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, a woman in the back even cried out. But I didn't move. I couldn't. My fingers gripped the edge of the bench as if the truth itself might swallow me. The report said the body belonged to a man, one of Daniel's former employees, someone reported missing years ago. I could feel the blood drain from my face. That man had a family, a life, and Daniel had buried him under my sister's name. under our name. For years, I thought I was grieving a sister, when in reality, I'd been mourning the wrong person, while the real monster was sleeping beside me. Daniel tried to compose himself, his lawyer whispering frantic words into his ear. But I could see it, the mask slipping. His hand trembled. His eyes darted toward me, then toward Lillian sitting across the aisle, alive, cold, and almost smug. For a brief haunting second, I thought he'd speak the truth. But he smiled instead. That awful, rehearsed smile he used whenever he was about to lie. "This is all a misunderstanding," he began, his voice calm but thin. "My wife, she's confused." But the judge wasn't fooled. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "the evidence suggests deliberate falsification of identity, insurance fraud, and that's when Daniel broke. The words poured out of him like poison, confessions laced with panic. He admitted the affair, the staged death, the insurance money laundered through my accounts. He said my name like a curse, blaming me for the holes in his plan. She wasn't supposed to find out," he shouted, pointing at me with trembling hands. "She was never supposed to know." The whole room froze. You could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to choke on. My lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder, steadying me, but I was already beyond shock. I was numb. I looked at Daniel, this man I once built a life with, trusted, loved, and I felt something deeper than hatred. It was clarity. The kind that comes when the lies finally stop echoing and all that's left is truth. Then Lillian stood up. Her voice cut through the silence, calm and cold. "He's lying," she said. "He faked my death to control me. To keep the money. I was terrified of him." The courtroom gasped again, and suddenly the two of them were shouting over each other. Daniel accusing Lillian of betrayal, Lillian accusing Daniel of manipulation. Years of deceit exploding like gunfire in front of strangers. The judge had to slam the gavel 3 times before anyone could hear him, and I just sat there, watching the empire of lies they'd built crumble in real time. Their love, their alliance, their entire web of deceit, all turning to dust. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, but instead, I felt hollow. Because beneath their screaming, beneath the chaos, there was one truth neither of them could erase. I had lost everything because of them. My trust, my peace, my sense of who I was. The prosecutor played the recordings I'd made, Daniel's late-night whispers to Lillian, their plans to start over once I was out of the picture. The jury's faces shifted one by one from skepticism to horror. I could feel the weight of judgment finally falling where it belonged. When Daniel heard his own voice echo through the speakers, his shoulders dropped. He looked smaller somehow, deflated, defeated. Lillian's face was unreadable, but I saw a flicker of something human in her eyes. Regret, maybe. Or fear. When the verdict was announced, time slowed again. The judge's voice was sharp, final, guilty. On all counts. Daniel's head dropped. Lillian stared straight ahead, her lip trembling, but no tears came. And then, something I'll never forget, Daniel reached for me. As the bailiff moved to take him, he leaned close enough for me to feel his breath on my cheek and whispered, "You were never supposed to know." The words hit harder than any scream. Because in that moment I realized, all of it, every bit of pain, had been built on a secret meant to stay buried forever. Then Lillian gasped and collapsed to the floor. The room erupted into chaos again. People rushed to her side, shouting for medics, and I just stood there, watching, silent, empty. Because even as she fainted, I knew it wasn't guilt that took her down. It was fear. Fear of what would come next. When the courtroom cleared, I sat alone in the echo of it all. The gavel still ringing in my mind. For the first time in years, I was free, but freedom felt strange, like stepping out of a storm only to find your house gone. Everything that defined me, wife, sister, believer, had been stripped away. And yet, as I walked outside into the pale afternoon light, a new kind of quiet filled me. Not peace, not yet, but something close. Because justice had been served. Lies had been dragged into daylight. The ghosts that haunted me were finally named, but deep down, a question still whispered. One that wouldn't let me rest. If the body in that grave wasn't Lillian's, then whose story had I just buried? Because freedom came with a cost. And the truth about that grave wasn't over yet. It was raining the day I went back to the grave. The kind of slow soaking rain that blurs the edges of the world, making everything look softer. Quieter. The headstone was still there, weathered but untouched. Lillian Callahan. Beloved sister. Gone too soon. I stood there for a long time, staring at the name, the dates, the lie carved into stone. I thought I was done with grief. But as the rain slid down my face, I realized grief never really leaves. It just changes shape. The forensic team had finished their final excavation weeks earlier. They told me gently that there had been more than one set of remains in that grave. 2 bodies, 1 adult, 1 infant. That word, infant, kept echoing in my mind long after the conversation ended. I had no idea my sister had been pregnant. The timeline? The secrets. None of it made sense. I kept wondering, was it Daniel's child? Or someone else's? I'll never know. Maybe that was the final cruelty of it all. That the truth came out in fragments, never whole, never merciful. When the story broke, the media swarmed like vultures. Headlines screamed, "The twin betrayal case." Reporters parked outside my home, asking me if I'd known about the second body, if I'd forgiven my husband, if I felt vindicated. I didn't answer. What do you say to people who only see your pain as a headline? They didn't care about justice, or they wanted spectacle. They wanted the tears, the drama, the scandal. But I'd lived it. I was the scandal. And I was so tired of being the broken woman they pitied from a distance. So I sold the house. Every room in that place held a ghost. Laughter that wasn't real, promises that never meant anything. I packed my life into 3 boxes. Old photos, a few books, and my grandmother's ring. I donated the rest. The firm, the house, the car, and all of it. It was like shedding a second skin that had grown too heavy to bear. When the last check cleared, I took the train to the coast. No destination, no plan. Just the ocean. I wanted to stand somewhere that reminded me how small I was, and how much bigger freedom could be. The cottage I found was tiny, just 2 rooms and a porch that faced the sea. The first night I slept there, I could still smell the salt in the wind, the waves crashing against the rocks like distant applause. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up in fear. I didn't check my phone or look over my shoulder. I just breathed, slowly, deeply, alive. I thought of Lillian, of the woman she'd become, of the woman she might have been if she'd chosen differently. Sometimes I wondered if she'd ever loved me, or if I'd just been another piece in her game. But I'll never get that answer. Still, there were moments when I'd dream of her. In those dreams, she wasn't angry or cruel. She was calm, smiling, standing at the airport again, hand in hand with Daniel. Except this time, when she turned to me, she wasn't gloating. She was crying. And she whispered, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I'd wake up shaking, not knowing if it was guilt or forgiveness that lingered in my chest. It took months to build the shelter, a place for women who'd lost everything like I had. Women whose pain wasn't visible, whose abusers didn't leave bruises but bank statements, fake smiles, and isolation. I named it the Second Sunrise. Every woman who walked through those doors carried her own kind of secret grave. I listened. I understood. Because I had lived inside one too. Some days, when the sky turns gray and the wind smells like rain, I drive back to that cemetery. I bring flowers, not for Lillian, but for the child. The one who never had a name. The one who never got a chance to choose between lies and truth. I kneel there, my hands pressed to the damp earth, and I tell them both the same thing. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. And it's strange. Forgiveness isn't loud. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like quiet. Like finally exhaling after holding your breath for too long. Like realizing you've stopped waiting for an apology that will never come. That's what freedom became for me. Not the absence of pain, but the choice to stop carrying it. Sometimes I still hear Daniel's voice in my dreams. The last thing he said to me in that courtroom, "You were never supposed to know." But now I think, maybe I was. Maybe all of it, the lies, the betrayal, the loss, was meant to strip me down to the truth of who I really was beneath the roles they gave me. Because once everything was gone, the marriage, the firm, the reputation, what was left was me, raw, unbroken, still standing. If you've ever been betrayed like that, you'll understand. There's a point when the pain stops being just pain. It becomes clarity. It becomes the map that shows you where not to return. I learned that love without honesty is just manipulation dressed in warmth. And that trust, once stolen, should never be loaned again to the same hands. The press eventually moved on to other scandals. New victims. New villains. But for me, it wasn't about them anymore. I had found a life where my name wasn't whispered with pity. I had built something good from something cruel. That was my justice. Not the verdict. Not the headlines. The becoming. Every evening, I sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the horizon fade into gold. And sometimes in the distance, I imagine I see her, a figure in red, hair blowing in the wind, turning back just once before she disappears into the mist. I don't chase her anymore. I just whisper, "Rest now, Lillian." Wherever you are, because that's the thing about truth, it doesn't die. You can bury it, hide it, lie about it. But one day it finds its way to the surface, covered in dirt but still shining. And when it does, it doesn't just set you free, it changes you. And that's when I learned the truth. Freedom is the greatest inheritance.